Stephen King fans know that if there's one thing this horror author isn't short on, it's ideas. The original It novel is over 1,000 pages long, so it's not too crazy to suggest there's enough left for a third movie. And that's not just wishful thinking. Both Pennywise actor Bill Skarsgard and It Chapter 2 director Andy Muschietti have made statements leading us to believe we could soon see more from the franchise. But will it be on the big screen or somewhere else? Just what is it about shared universes that gets sci-fi fans so excited? Even though they're different formats, the world of It has often been compared to that of the hit Netflix show Stranger Things. And no, it's not just because Finn Wolfhard appears in both of them. The two stories have a lot of overlap if you really stop and think about it. A sleepy town populated with mostly oblivious adults, an ancient evil force from another world, and a group of kids who are the only hope of stopping it. There's even an It Easter egg in season 2 of Stranger Things in which Bob tells Will he used to be afraid of a clown when he was a child in Maine. It's no secret that It was a huge inspiration for Stranger Things, and some fans even believe that they exist within the same universe. If there was really going to be a continuation of the It series, it wouldn't necessarily have to be a movie. There's no reason the lore from It couldn't be used as the basis of a series available for streaming on Netflix or a similar platform. Heck, the fact that Stranger Things has been such a hit is pretty much proof that the concept works. The continuation of It being a streaming show is a fan theory that not only seems likely, but it's one we definitely wouldn't hate. Stephen King is an author with a long and storied career. Sorry, we couldn't resist. By the time he came out with It, publishers had pretty much stopped questioning his genius, which meant that they didn't blink at all of the crazy, off-the-wall lore thrown into It as more of an interesting aside than anything else. Now, we're not complaining here. Who would complain about a giant turtle who chokes on a couple of galaxies? We're just saying there's a lot more going on behind the scenes in the It universe than we got a chance to see in either movie. Not that we're still upset over the turtle not being in It Chapter 2 or anything. And even more powerful than that turtle is Gan, a character who is mentioned in other books besides It. There are so many characters and so much cosmology of the world that the first two movies didn't even touch on. If there's going to be an It Chapter 3, it could pretty much exclusively focus on this kind of crazy lore instead of the Losers Club, who had their stories wrapped up pretty neatly in Chapter 2. Of course, the fans are wondering if there's even going to be a Chapter 3, and it turns out Bill Skarsgard is also thinking about it. By now, he has playing Pennywise down to an art form, so we can see why he's eager to reprise the role. But instead of looking to the future, he's interested in taking a deep dive into the past of Pennywise, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense. It Chapter 2 mentions that Pennywise has been around for quite a long time, as in millions and millions of years. But even if we're just looking at its recorded history, it stretches back quite a ways in the book. Instead of doing a sequel to It Chapter 2, which is implausible for various reasons, what about a prequel looking back at Pennywise's past?
What?
In the books, we learn more about the history of It in regards to its interaction with humans. From 1740 to 1743, it embarked on a 3-year reign of terror, which resulted in 300 people from Derry going missing. American Horror Story did an entire season on the Lost Roanoke colony, so who's to say the same couldn't be done with It? There are tons of examples of It causing mayhem and destruction long before it ever met the Losers Club, and this is something we definitely wouldn't mind seeing on the big screen. Earlier we mentioned that having a direct continuation of It Chapter 2 seems implausible, and that's because the movie pretty much follows where the book ends. But there's one aspect of the book which was left out of the movies that could come back to haunt the inhabitants of Derry. If you're an It fan, then you know that Pennywise isn't really a clown. It just looks like one when it thinks it'll scare children. In fact, its true physical form most closely resembles a giant spider instead. Although most people call the monster Pennywise and refer to it as a he, the book reveals that the monster is likely a female, or at the very least it lays eggs. We aren't exactly up to date on ancient alien biology, we have to admit, but it has us wondering what would happen if the monster left behind a clutch of eggs that didn't get destroyed at the end of the movie. Would they hatch in the future after the Losers Club is long gone? After all, Mike Hanlon was the last loser sticking around Derry, and he said he was leaving at the end of the movie. What would happen if a new fear-eating creature hatched in the humble town of Derry? It would be going outside of the bounds of the novel, definitely, but it might be an interesting way to expand the source material. Are you a fan of the classic Stanley Kubrick film The Shining? Well, you know who isn't? Stephen King. That's right, go ahead and reconsider your entire taste in cinema now. King didn't enjoy Kubrick's interpretation of the character Jack Torrance and said he didn't get the slow descent into insanity he was hoping for in the film. But now, after all these years, we're finally getting a sequel to The Shining based on the book Dr. Sleep, also by Stephen King. And hopefully he likes this film adaptation a lot better. But we're not just waxing poetic about King's work or their film adaptations. There's a crossover between It and The Shining and Dr. Sleep. In It, there's a character named Dick Halloran whose shining allowed him to save several lives when the black spot burned down. One of those he rescued was the father of none other than Mike Hanlon. Dick is a much more prolific character in Dr. Sleep, and it's possible there could be some crossover between that movie and It Chapter 3. After all, The Shining and Dr. Sleep are far from King's only works that cross over with It. Not only is It mentioned in other works by Stephen King, many of them came after the novel It. So maybe the giant terrifying alien clown monster isn't quite as gone as we thought. In the Tommyknockers, Tommy Jacklin travels to Derry and believes he sees a clown staring at him from the sewers. We're sure that could have just been any old clown. And in Dreamcatcher, Mr. Gray sees a plaque honoring those who perished in Derry, and it's graffitied with the words, "Pennywise lives." The more Stephen King books that get adapted in other formats, and we're not complaining here, the greater the chances of us getting more It. The Macroverse, from which Pennywise hails, is something else we've seen in King's books many times, including the Dark Tower series. King has long been hoping for a sequel to the movie, and Amazon Prime is working on a totally separate series based on the books. If the Dark Tower catches on, then perhaps it will lead to the Macroverse being explored in greater depth than we've seen so far. And it's possible it will be no small part of that story. After all, when It isn't chasing kids around, its existence has some pretty spooky ramifications. The creature we know as It may be more or less timeless, but that isn't true for pretty much any other aspects of the movies. The book It was published in 1986, which is around when the present day portions of the book take place. That means when the losers are kids, It attacks Georgie Denborough back in 1957. When it was time to adapt the book for the big screen, it was decided that the first movie would kick off in the year 1988, and the second would be in present day. If there's one thing we know movie studios love, it's remaking movies that have already been made. Come on, they even did a modern retelling of the horror classic Child's Play. Considering It Chapter 2 smashed all kinds of box office records, it stands to reason the studio will want to make more cash money. We aren't saying it would be a good idea to make an even more modern, updated reimagining of It, we're just saying we could see it happening. After all, the things that terrify humans on a deep primal level like drowning, decay, and hatred are all pretty timeless. How long before someone decides we need a new, shiny version of this classic Stephen King book? Yes, it is a literal monster, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have feelings. Sure, most of them are based on the desire to terrify people and then eat them, but there's still feelings. The first two It movies focused on the Losers Club and their weaknesses and strengths as human beings. Their feelings, secret desires, and greatest fears were the focus of the movies, but we didn't spend a ton of time on what It was going through. No, we're not feeling badly for this terrifying ancient monster. We just think it's interesting to consider things from It's point of view. After all, it's lived an extremely long life, yet was pretty traumatized by its first experience with the Losers Club. Fear isn't something it's used to feeling, and it definitely underestimated the strength of humans. Yes, it would be awesome to see a movie about its time before it encountered the Losers Club, but it would also be interesting to see a continuation of its story, whether within the It universe or another Stephen King universe. But what about a movie or series from the creature's point of view? The book definitely includes more insight into its world, and that's something we'd like to see Bill Skarsgard portray. In It Chapter 2, there's a scene in which Beverly Marsh visits her old childhood home only to discover her terrible father has long passed away. Instead, she finds herself face to face with an old woman who calls herself Mrs. Kirsch, but who we obviously know is just It in disguise. Yet in the movie version, there's a photo on Mrs. Kirsch's wall of a circus performer who looks just like Pennywise with no makeup on. Now in the book, it's clear It is just a monster and always has been, but It Chapter 2 seems to hint that there was a human component to It at one own time. Maybe it was once masquerading as a genuine clown instead of bringing the form out only to scare people. Or perhaps the monster was inspired by a real-life version of Pennywise the Dancing Clown. In the book, it sometimes calls itself Robert Bob Gray. Could this be the person we saw in the photo at Mrs. Kirsch's house? Was Bob Gray ever a real person, and if so, what's his story? And what happened to the little girl we saw in the photo with him? There are a lot of questions here, and we wouldn't be surprised if this scene was meant to set up possibilities for It Chapter 3. One of the interesting things about the It series is wondering where the terror of It begins and the terror of the human experience begins. We know It impacts the town of Derry and the people living there, but how much? How unpleasant would Beverly's dad have been if he didn't live in Derry? What about Eddie's mom? At the end of It Chapter 2, the surviving losers look happy enough, but are they really free of it? In fact, it would be kind of interesting to see what ended up happening with the losers once they're back in their quote-unquote normal lives. Does Bill ever learn how to write an ending for his stories? Do things work out between Bev and Ben? Does Richie start writing his own jokes? Just how much of their lives have been shaped by It, and what will they have left now that he's gone? We could see it as more of a psychological thriller than a flat-out horror movie, but it would be interesting nonetheless. What do you think about the possibility of It Chapter 3 being a thing? Are you all for anything Stephen King, or do you think the story has already been finished? Let us know what you think in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, why don't you consider subscribing to ScreenRant for more awesome content like this in your feed each and every day. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.